Hello, everyone. It's a Monday. I want to say happy Monday, but we're just going to go with hey, Monday. I'm here with Joel Payne, who is the Chief Communications Officer of Move On and a Democratic strategist. And we're going to talk about this big, beautiful bill that just passed out of committee and so many other things. So let's just hop right into it. Joel. Mike Johnson wants to pass this by Memorial Day. That's next week. Now that it is out of committee, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, Maya, it's good to be with you. Thanks for having me. I have actually a pretty interesting perspective on this because I have a background working in Senate leadership, worked for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid during the first 2 years of Obamacare. And I remember of Obama's term where we passed Obamacare. And I remember distinctly when we were passing Obamacare, there were all of these mile markers that we would try to hit. We would say, oh, we're going to get it out by Easter. We're going to get it out by Memorial Day. We're going to get it out by Halloween. And if you'll remember, that bill did not pass until March of the following year. And I say that just to say the legislative process is meant to be slow and deliberate. And just because Donald Trump and Mike Johnson wanted to be the case does not change and alter the political gravity of some of these Republican members in places like Mike Lawler, some of these Republican members like Don Bacon, who have constituents who don't like the Trump agenda and don't like what is stuffed in this bill. And so they still have a massive political problem on their hands of how do you sell folks who you are supposed to be fighting for? How do you sell them on spending less money on their health care and cutting their Medicare to pay for tax cuts for people like Elon Musk and Donald Trump? That's a hard sell. It's bad math. It's bad policy. And I don't think it's going to work out for Republicans the way they hope that it's going to work out.
Well, the pressure is on because I think Trump is pushing them to get this done. And it seems like their method is distracting their constituency as opposed to actually trying to even sell them on this bill. Can you talk about how Democrats might be able to take advantage of this?
Well, a few things. One, just the reality. Tell stories. Talk about what actually the impacts of this will be. I find interesting, one of the districts in the country that are most reliant on Medicaid, Mike Johnson, the House Speaker, his district has one of, I believe, the top 5 or top 10 most constituents who are reliant on Medicaid. So when they are talking about, oh, we're just going to do work requirements, we're going to go after waste, fraud, and abuse, everybody knows that that is just a fancy way of saying, we're going to gut this program. We're going to spend less on it. We're going to make it harder for you to get it. And when you get it, we're going to have it do less things for you to impact your life. And so what Democrats have to do is point that out, highlight it. I think it's great that you have Democrats doing things like going to Republican districts. I imagine you'll see more of that, talking directly to voters, not just their own voters in their own districts, but in these Republican districts that are going to be impacted, and just push back on the propaganda that Republicans are pushing out from the Speaker's office and from the White House.
And if they don't push back hard enough, what's at stake here? Because it seems like there's so much confusion around whether this is truly going to hurt people or if this is propaganda coming from the Democrats that all so much is at stake. What will happen if this bill passes?
Well, I think what's at stake is what do we value? I talked about working in the Speaker's office, rather in the Senate Majority Leader's office previously. I also worked for Congresswoman Barbara Lee of Oakland, California, who was there for about 2 decades, and she would always say, and I'll never forget it. She'll say, "A budget is a moral document. Show me your budget, and you show me what you believe in." Well, Republicans, so far as I can tell, believe in spending more money on the top 1% and spending more money on their tax cuts than on healthcare, on critical services. They want to, Donald Trump, this is not necessarily related to this piece of legislation. He wants to spend less money on veterans benefits and wants to spend $400 million on a military parade. I mean, that's a priorities argument. And if you're a Democrat, that's what you have to do. You have to put that in front of voters and highlight for them, this is the choice that Republicans are actively making, and they misled you. They misled you in the election, and they're misleading you now. And I think there are Democrats who are doing a good job of that. I've seen folks out there, whether it's Senator Chris Murphy, you've seen Senator Cory Booker, you've seen others who have been very good at delivering that message. And I think you're going to see a lot more of that as we get closer to this. Call me skeptical that Mike Johnson is going to be able to meet this Memorial Day deadline.
So I want to say that he's not going to meet it. That's the energy I'm putting out there in the world. I love this idea of it being a moral document. Why aren't Democrats running with that messaging in particular? Because it feels like sometimes we find something that works and we forget that it works. And I'm not seeing that language, that narrative, that storytelling. Can you talk about this? Because I would love us to do more of that.
Yeah, for sure. Look, I have some empathy for communicators, particularly in the Democratic Party, especially right now. Listen, this is a team that nobody wants to be a part of. Nobody wants to wear the jersey of a Democrat 5 months after the election that we just saw in 2024 and what the state of the Democratic Party is right now, the disregard that the party is held within. And so I think it's easy to miss some of the strong, bold voices within the party that are talking about this. The fact of the matter is we just don't hear everything that comes out of Washington, D.C. We're not on every live stream. We're not on every constituent mailing. We're not in every meeting with constituents when they come to Washington or they come to their district office. I think these things are being said. I think the problem that Democrats are having is there is no general organizing premise of the party right now. And that happens a lot when you have a party that has gone through an electoral shellacking, like Democrats recently experienced in November. I think the closer you get to the 2026 midterm elections, I think a clearer Democratic message will come through. I think also the closer you get to 2028, you will start to see more credible, more notable Democratic messengers stick their head up and start to build that credibility. But that takes time. And I know that that's an unsatisfactory answer for millions of Americans who
Yeah.
want an opposition party to really fight. But the honest to goodness truth is we're in a media environment where there's only so much that gets through,
Mhm.
which is why, by the way, it's important for Democrats to come on programs like yours, go to places that are non-traditional outlets. Don't just go on the Sunday shows and meet the press in this week. Go everywhere. Go to where people are and say it over and over and over again. And you'll know you're doing a good job when people say, "Oh my gosh, I've heard you say that 10 times this last week." That's when you'll know you're doing a good job. When someone tells you, "Stop saying the same thing over and over and over again." That's messaging.
Yeah, no, exactly. And I was going to say, I want to get bored of hearing moral document over and over again, most definitely. Because what we're up against, you would think, looking at RFK Jr. taking his family swimming in sewer water, Pam Bondi is trying to push a plan to allow indictments of political enemies, Kash Patel is Kash Patel. Like, how are we losing to these people? Is it a matter of just waiting for them to fizzle out or make enough errors that their own constituents just decide to get rid of them? Where do you see? Is there a strategy here to beat these guys?
Yeah, Maya, this is a big question, and I'm going to do my best to try to get at some of it. And I'm sure you and your viewers and others have thoughts as well. But here's my take on it. I think that there is a long story of Democrats losing trust with the public. I think there are a lot of reasons why that happened. I think some of that is embedded in the loss of trust in institutions, whether it's the media, whether it's the financial system, the healthcare system, so on and so forth. All of these institutions that we were all brought up. I'm about. I just turned 42 years old. I can't say I'm about 40. I'm 42.
Happy
And
happy belated birthday.
thank you. And at my age, someone like me has seen the fall of these institutions in my lifetime over the
Mhm.
last 2 decades. And so when you have that happen, and when you tell people, hey, trust the smart people who run the banking system, trust the smart people who run our schools, trust the smart people who run our healthcare system, at some point, the people are going to say, why? They keep failing us.
Mhm.
And Democrats, I believe, were tagged with defending that status quo. Even when you get to doing things like arguing for democracy, that became a stand in for the status quo. And there's a long, frustrating story of how we got there. I'm sure people might have a lot of opinions about how we got there and maybe how we could have avoided getting there. But the truth of the matter is, we're there. And so I think what Democrats have to do is start to slowly rebuild trust. And I think you do that by being honest and leveling with people, talking to people, not talking at people, acknowledging when things
Mhm.
are broken and acknowledging when you're going to be a reformer and you're going to fix it. And above all else, be authentic and real. Being
Mhm.
authentic and real doesn't mean you got to be polished and wear a tie and throw on a sports coat and stand up and give a 40-minute stem winder. You can just jump on your Instagram live, or you can just jump on YouTube and you can just speak 5 minutes about what your thoughts are. That's what people are looking for. So if you're asking me where the breakdown happened, there's just been a fundamental breakdown in trust between the general public, particularly the voting public, and Democrats. And I think Democrats have a lot of work to do to rebuild that. What will help them is Republicans and Donald Trump failing, falling on their face, and proving themselves to not be genuine and fighting for working people like they've claimed they are genuine about, which we know they're not. We knew it wasn't true in Donald Trump's first term, and we know it's not true now.
Yeah, I mean, they're spectacularly bad at what they're doing, Republicans, as far as every time I see a hearing, every time I hear a quip, I'm going, how do people not see this? Is there something to be said about Democrats not being able to hit back in an aggressive way? Because it seems like it backfires sometimes when Democrats call out this craziness, and then people expect somehow Democrats to take the moral high ground, stick to the message. How can they call out? Because I love during Kamala Harris's campaign, the statements that were snarky and those kind of things. They were fun, but were they effective? And is there a better way to do this, to expose how absolutely crazy these Republicans are?
Well, you have to be true to who you are. And I'm going to go back to that word trust again. But like, think about it like this. Think about some of the more high trust communicators in the Democratic Party. There's a few of them. AOC, Bernie Sanders. Also, Joe Manchin to his constituents. And just let me make my point. Those folks all come from very different places politically. They come from different parts of the country, different backgrounds, different ages, and different political ideologies in the case of the AOC Bernie versus the Manchin side. But people believe that when they say something, they believe it. Whether or not you like it, they believe what they're saying. So they believe when AOC is talking about an issue, even if they don't like it, even if they don't think that she's right about the Green New Deal or about Medicare for all, they know she means it. They know it's not message tested. And they know it's not something that is meant to just score well on opinion research. They know that it's something that's from her heart. They know that when Joe Manchin talks about governing from the middle and talks about protecting coal country, they know he means it. And so I guess my point, just to answer your question, would be, I think where Democrats will always find their North Star and where they need to start realigning to is that quotient of authenticity. And they have to find it, and they can't find it from people like me who like to claim myself to be a strategist, right? And I like to go and give advice to elected office holders and people who run organizations and whatnot. The truth of the matter is, as much good advice as I might try to give people, that's not going to replace who you actually are at your core. The first thing I talk to people when I talk to people, the first thing I say to them is, what matters to you? Let's start from there. What's important to you? Kamala Harris. You know what Kamala Harris is a really trusted messenger last cycle on the issue of abortion and reproductive rights, because it was pretty clear to people when she talked about it, she cared about it, she was knowledgeable, she did the work. You know what it wasn't clear that she cared about in the same way? Maybe issues of international affairs in the Middle East. People felt like she was giving an answer that she thought she should have. And I'm not saying that to be unfair to the former vice president. I'm just saying that's an example of where being genuine about what you care about and leaning into that versus just going with what someone smart told you to say.
I love that. But at the same time, I ask myself, the bar seems to be set almost impossibly high for Democrats. And so when we look to what the GOP is doing, is there anything that is going to help us peel off the numbers of whether it's MAGA or independents? Is there anything that we can do to peel off just enough of their base to help us turn this around?
Yeah, good questions. Well, one, the bar is high for us because our coalition demands more of us. The Democratic coalition demands thoughtfulness. They demand some clarity, some consistency. The Republican coalition, and I don't say this to be disrespectful of people who vote Republican, that is their choice. That is what they choose to do. That is their lived experience. But they don't demand the same thing of their leaders that Democrats and that Democratic aligned people demand of their leaders. Democratic aligned voters demand things of their leaders that Donald Trump's voters don't demand of him. And so when you're faced with that as kind of a starting point, I think you are going to face different tests. Like, you can't go as a Democrat and just go lie in the public square and hope that people don't notice. Your voters will notice. So yes, that's a disadvantage. But you know what an advantage is? I still think there are more people who don't like how Donald Trump does what he does versus that do. I know that the election might not bear that out, but I still think there's the largest coalition in American politics, and I honestly believe this, is the anti-Trump coalition. And it's just a matter of, can you get them out and can you engage them? And I really think that that's what Joe Biden was able to do in 2020. I think that's what Democrats were able to do in 2022. And that's the bold thing that Kamala Harris was trying to do again in 2024. We just fell short of that. But I think that coalition still exists. And so to answer your other question about how do you peel off those Republican voters, listen, I think there's a percentage of those voters that are they are in it for the personality. It's a cult of personality with Donald Trump. And there's really not much he's going to say that's going to peel them off. But there is a certain chunk of those voters, maybe it's 20, 30, 40%, who don't really pay attention to every single thing. They don't pay attention. They don't watch the big four networks every night. They don't watch the political cable networks. They don't watch smart programs like yours. And how do we get to those people? And I think the way you get to them is a few ways. One, again, it's that authenticity, but it's also being accepting of the fact that they're not going to line up with you on every issue. It's easy to win the 8, 9 out of 10 people who agree with you 8, 9 out of 10 times. It's hard to win the people who maybe agree with you 3 or 4 times. Those people could still be allies and could still be a part of your winning coalition, but you got to be smart enough to figure out, how do you reach them? How do you do that without compromising your values? And there are smart political minds in the Democratic Party that I think have to get the work on how to do that.
So speaking of the future of the Democratic Party, because there's a lot of conversation around that, and we have these young upstarts like David Hogg, and then we have people like Governor Pritzker who are really putting up a fight. What do you see as the future messaging strategies and the people who you think are going to come out really that the rest of us can get behind?
I'm so glad you asked that question, particularly about David Hogg. I want to say a quick thing about that. I think it is such a mistake what the Democratic National Committee is doing in terms of reacting to some of the disagreements that some of those committee folks have with David Hogg. Look, the sentiment is real that folks might be concerned that he is going to, from his position, going to be activated in certain primaries. And I think he said that the goal of his group that he started up, Leaders We Deserve, is safe district Democrats. So not going after frontline Democrats, but going after Democrats in safe districts who are not fighting the way that he and his political allies believe. Now, do I think that in every case that's going to be the most strategic decision? Probably not. And I would probably advise him to focus on some parts of that and not focus on others. But the guy is trying and he wants to fight, and he's got the energy and he's got people with him. And that's when I talk about that 3 or 4 out of 10 voter, a lot of those people are going to be moved by what David Hogg is doing. And they're going to be spoken to and they're going to feel seen and heard when you have folks like that. And so you cannot chase away people who do not conform to all of your requirements, all of your prerequisites of, to be a committee member in good standing, you have to do this, this, and this. He is someone who has been an outspoken advocate. He is someone who has lived through a horror at Parkland School in Florida, where he was there for that school shooting. He represents a generation that feels disaffected by this party. And I think it's such a mistake to just think about ways to alienate that group of voter, but also just like that person in culture. I think I can't tell you how much of a misplay it is on behalf of the DNC right now. And I think when you talk about things that Democrats have to do to rebuild trust, rebuild the party, rebuild political strength, that's a good example of what not to do.
I'm so glad that you said that, because I can tell you my mom, 74-year-old mom, texted me this weekend and said, I like that David Hogg, because I guess he was on a show with Carville. And she's like, Carville needs to shut up. And I can say that.
What, Maya? It's great that she likes David Hogg. I'm not telling anyone they got to line up with like everything he says. You don't have to get down with everything that he believes and says and every candidate he gets behind. But he's being responsive to the moment.
Yes.
People are dying for leaders who will fight and for a party structure that will fight. And that's, to be honest with you, why the power source right now on the anti-Trump Democratic side of the argument politically right now, it's not in the Democratic Party. It's at the grassroots.
Mm-hmm.
The energy is not with stodgy, kind of party officials, with state party leaders. They do important work, by the way, to build infrastructure and to allow for political success at the state level. I'm not knocking that, but I'm just saying the energy right now is being driven by the grassroots, and it's being driven by kind of creative ideas like the one that David Hogg is coming up with, which again, I might not like how that all plays out, but I used to say a lot of times too in the past, primaries, presidential primaries, some people really are afraid of them. They think, oh, they're destructive and they're gonna surface all these disagreements and they're gonna make you weaker. I disagree. I think they make you stronger. I think the people who get chosen often come out of that stronger, more durable, more well-rounded, more well-read. And I think parties rob themselves of opportunities to grow when they don't allow for that type of creative tension to exist.
Yeah, it's almost like we're afraid of our own success in that same point. And so I agree with you there. And I think grassroots is where it's at. I know a lot of the people watching are probably asking, what can they do? And what can we do more of in our communities? And so that's my last question to you is what can the people do?
A few things. Well, one, you mentioned that I am a chief communications officer for Move On, and while I'm not here speaking for the organization, I will tell you we do really impactful work, petition-led work around the country. If you go to our website, moveon.org, lots of ways for you to get involved. We're doing more kind of on the ground collective action work. That is a core belief that we believe in. So find an organ, whether it's Move On, there are others that are doing great work out there as well. Maybe you decide in your community the best person to run for something is you. Well, there are organizations that are creating space and creating energy and creating logistics for people to run, groups like Run for Something, that are going and finding people to run for office. And so do that. And also I would just say, pay attention to every election every time around. Okay. A county supervisor's election, a school board election, the governor, the senator, the mayor, and of course the presidential. Look, protecting what we have fought for is a full-time job. And it's not something that you can just pay attention to every 4 years. And I know that that's frustrating to folks because they feel like, why? Why do I have to always pay attention? Well, it's the same reason that the people that came 2 and 3 generations before us, who look like me and you, Maya, had to go and have dogs sicked on them and have fire hoses sicked on them, because it's worth fighting for. And so make sure you honor that by showing up every single time. So stay involved, stay engaged. Don't get disheartened. That's the last thing I'll say. I think in this moment, let's call it Donald Trump and the folks who I don't believe have your best interest at heart, what they want you to do is disengage. They want you to get discouraged and they want you to feel like there's nothing you can do. And the truth of the matter is, we've seen since Inauguration Day, there's plenty you can do. You can go join a protest, a peaceful protest, like the one that Move On and many other organizations were part of for Hands Off. You can go and join an organization. You can go and run for office. You can do so much to get involved. You can go give money to a cause you care about. Give your time to a cause you care about. Lots that you can do.
Thank you so much for those empowering words, Joel. This is a great way to start a Monday. I can now officially say happy Monday. I was afraid to say that at the top of the show. So thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully we can have you back soon.
We'd love to.